I bought a non-running truck at an auction, or at least that's what the guy told me when I came to pick it up. Saw me pulling up in just our car with obviously no way to tow it and said, "They told you that thing doesn't run, right?" No, they said it ran rough and it wouldn't say idling too well, but they did say it would run and drive. Well, it does run, but I wouldn't drive it. Proceeded to jump start it because the battery was dead. Was definitely running rough. Did run a lot better though after it warmed up, and I proceeded to drive it about 150 miles home. It's been a few days now. I got a rainy day. We're inside in the shop. The codes were cleared when I picked it up, but I did talk to the guy that owned it. I asked him what he knew about it, and he said that it just started running rough one day. You know, all of a sudden out of the blue, it wasn't like something that built up, and he pulled the codes and was getting misfires on one cylinder. He couldn't remember whether it was 6 or 8, but one cylinder. They did compression tests and compression was good on all cylinders except for that one that was missing. And then they did plugs and wires to make sure that it wasn't an ignition issue, and that was pretty much all I did. That's the information I got from him. And I'd already bought it. He had no reason to lie to me, but you know, I'm gonna confirm everything that he said. That was smart thinking. That's probably where I should have started. A compression test to confirm what I was told. But being that I didn't have a compression tester and the codes and the misfire counter on the scanner weren't reporting any misfires, that isn't where I decided to start. It's showing it's passed a misfire test. I decided to start with the basics and eliminate any air intake issues. I pulled off the air intake duct, changed out the air filter, which was filthy, and I also cleaned the throttle body. I've had some experience with these Vortec engines in the past where the throttle body gets gunked up and air can't pass through at idle, and so it's starving for air when it's idling. You can see light evenly all the way through around on the bottom, where we couldn't see that light at all. Changing the air filter and cleaning the throttle body didn't make it run any better, but I did see one new symptom. Started getting no oil pressure on the gauge on the dash and a no oil pressure alert on the dash come up. So I started by hooking up my mechanical oil pressure gauge to start diagnosing that. We've got our gauge on the floor right here. I can see it from the driver's seat. I can see that the gauge has good pressure. Let's see what the dash says. Dash is showing nothing. And it's coming up saying engine power reduced, oil pressure low, stop engine. Okay. We have oil pressure. So this tells us this is an electrical issue. This is not a mechanical issue. The oil pressure sensor is on the back of the valley. It's basically impossible to see and very hard for me to reach. Took some patience, but I was able to get back probes in the 3 wires on the sensor so that I could test it. The red multimeter should give us our 5 volt, and then the yellow one should give us our signal reference. So I'm just gonna turn power on. Key on, engine off. I expect to have 5 volts, and I don't. I don't have 5 volts. So there's our resistance. It's an issue with not getting power to the sensor. So after seeing that we have very low input voltage on the oil pressure sensor, this made me look into the schematics on where that 5 volt reference is coming from and see if I could identify where we need to test next to figure out why we don't have good voltage coming there. We already have tested the resistance on the oil pressure sensor, and we know that it has reasonable resistance values. So if we look at this schematic, right next to the engine oil pressure sensor on this 5 volt rail is the camshaft position sensor, which is throwing a code for something wrong with the circuit, which we haven't had a chance to investigate yet. That was next on our list. Next is the throttle inlet absolute pressure sensor. After looking to see where the sensor is located, which is right here on the side of the air box, if I'm remembering correctly, the first thing that we did was take off the whole air box, air snorkel. I believe that I unplugged that sensor at that point in time, and I think after we put that all back together, that was when we got the oil pressure code. One of the beauties of recording all that is that I can go back and look at the footage and confirm if I'm remembering correctly or not. And I can see here that I am remembering that timing correctly. And I also noticed in reviewing this clip that I struggled a bit to get that sensor plugged back in. I'm starting to wonder if maybe, since that's the timing when all this happened, if maybe there's a rubbed wire that I grounded out, or maybe I bent the pins when I was plugging in, seeing as I was struggling on this. And as I'm standing here looking down at this sensor, sure looks to me like I plugged the connector in upside down. Let's see if I just unplug that connector, then let's see if we now have 5 volts. Let's go turn our key switch on. I've got the voltmeters on. And looky there, we've got 4.99 volts on the red meter. That's our 5 volt rail. Let me just try plugging this thing back in the right way. Wasn't so hard. And we've still got 5 volts. So that's what it was. It definitely was plugged in the wrong way. Let's start this thing up and see if we've got oil pressure. I bet we do. Boy, that thing started up a lot better too. Got oil pressure. And our camshaft position sensor not being lined up was definitely causing us a problem. So I finally decided to go back to where I should have started and do a compression test. I pulled all the spark plugs. I disabled the ignition system by pulling the 2 harnesses on either bank, and I've disabled the injection system by pulling the fuel pump fuse and the 2 injector fuses. I'm just gonna go down this side, so we'll do 1, 3, 5, 7, and then we'll jump to the other side. All right, so we've got 170 on cylinder number 1. Move on to cylinder number 3. Call that 167. Now for cylinder number 5. 165. And cylinder number 7. It's like 180 there. That's it for bank 1. Go over to bank 2. Cylinder number 2. Cylinder number 4. Sounds to me like I didn't get that one tightened all the way. I'm not getting any compression on cylinder number 4. All the rest of them have great compression. And I'm not sure if I'm just not getting the compression tester screwed in tight enough for whatever reason on there, or if it's truly no compression. But I figured the easiest way to figure that out is just to put the spark plug back in that hole. We still have everything disconnected. That's the only cylinder that has a plug in it. We'll easily be able to hear, is there any compression when we turn the engine over? So let's give that a shot. Sounds to me like that's a negative. We've also pretty much killed our battery. I let the battery charger run for about 2 hours. I'm gonna see if it'll turn over now. If not, I'll put a jump pack on it and then we'll finish this test out. Well, that's pretty conclusive to me. We've got no compression at all on cylinder number 4. It's been a week or so, but I'm back working on this. I decided to just try and pull the valve cover, since that's easy to do, and just inspect the valve train from the top side. See if I can see anything there. All our bolts are loose. Valve cover off. So these 2 are cylinder number 4. Intake, exhaust. If we look at this spring right here, that sure looks like a broken spring to me. And we can see, if we look down, this rocker arm is advanced. These 2 are sitting flat. This rocker arm is advanced, so it must be in the exhaust stroke, and it's loose. There's play in there. So even though our push rod's pushing the rocker arm, it's not pushing all the way to the valve. So our valve's sitting down because the valve spring's broken. So valve spring, no big deal. The question is what other damage did it do? So I'm gonna go ahead and just try and pull this rocker arm off. See what kind of shape everything's in. Not really seeing any excessive wear. Let's see, can we pull our valve up? Yeah, it'll come up all the way. It does seem to pull in and seat like that. My compression tester has these short leads with the spark plug thread on one end and then a quick connect on the other end. And then that quick connect connects to the gauge. So you can easily switch out depending upon what thread size you have, and it's a lot easier to screw in with just this short hose than having this whole thing connected. This quick connect right here is the same as what you have on an airline. So I can just hook this into the air compressor hose. So I think I'm gonna connect this to the cylinder, connect the other end to the air compressor, and see if the cylinder and valve will hold air pressure. I would expect if there was any damage to the piston or to the valve that would cause it not to hold pressure well. All right, so it was letting air out, but as soon as I lifted the valve, which when the spring's working, you can hear a little bit of air escaping, but it makes sense that some would escape down through the rings. But when I push on this valve, I cannot push it. I mean, I'm pushing as hard as I can, and I cannot push that valve down, which means it's holding good compression. So that gives me enough confirmation to go ahead and get a valve ordered. I'll swap the valve out, and then we can do a compression test and see truly how much compression can the cylinder hold. And this will hold our valve in place for us when we replace our spring. With the air hooked up like this, I should be able to just remove this retainer, pull off this old spring, and if the compression is within an acceptable range, then I think it's safe to assume that the cylinder and the piston and the valve and everything are still in good shape. We've got the air hose still hooked up. We're gonna hook that back up to the compressor. I did run a test and the compressor can keep up. In fact, if I've got the compressor on, it will build pressure. The compressor is gonna be running constantly until I get this done, so it's probably gonna be hard for you to hear me too because of that. I got a new spring, went with the genuine GM. Double wrapped. Looks like the old one, but not broken. I didn't have a valve spring compressor, so I picked this one up. I'll put a link in the description. The reason why I picked this one out was it does have a 3/8 drive, so you can just put your impact right on here and tighten it down rather than having it. Most of the other ones I looked at were just a hand screw. They didn't have any way to put an impact on there. So that was one of the reasons why I picked this one, and it was relatively affordable. So I'll put a link to that below if anybody's interested. Let's see what happens. Good pressure on our cylinder. I cannot push that valve cap. I'm gonna take a brass punch and try and remove that cap. There we go. Now we should be able to pull our retainers out, not drop them. There's one. There's the other. There's our cap. Slide that on our valve spring. Then we're going into the compressor. Press that down with the impact. Pull our old broken spring off. Slide our new spring down on there. Try and fit this retainer in there. All right, that's one. And that's two. I'm pulling the whole tool up to keep them locked in the right place. So now I should be able to get this on here. Loosen it off. And there we go. Now we got a good spring on there. We're all set. Our next step is going to be to get the rocker arm back on. I'm just going to bar this engine over until I see our intake valve open. We got our exhaust valve here and our intake valve there. And I'm just going to go until that valve is fully open like that. There we go. So then we'll take and put our rocker back. There's our 22. I'm just going to slide this valve cover back on here. It's going to switch over to the compression test gauge. All right, well, we've got 150 PSI of compression, so not bad at all. I will take that. Based on that, I'm gonna go ahead and get all this put back together. Go ahead and get the valve cover torqued back down, get our coil pack put back on that side, get all our wiring harnesses hooked back up, get our air duct hooked back up, get all our spark plugs back in. All right, it's all put back together, at least as far as I know. Now's the moment of truth. Time to start it up and see what happens. Sounds like a good running 6-liter to me. There is a little tick. That also could just be because it's been sitting and it doesn't have oil up there. Now that tick's just there at idle and it's already gone. Can't explain why the computer wasn't reporting any misfires, because it was certainly misfiring with an exhaust valve stuck wide open. That little bit of tick that was there when we first started it up, when it's cold and you start it up, it does have that just for a few seconds, but then it's gone. And the truck does have close to 250,000 miles. That's not uncommon for these LS engines with higher mileage. As for what's next, I'm not 100% sure yet. I bought it because it was so cheap. I got it for about half of what the Blue Book value was. I bought it sight unseen in an auction, so I wasn't able to make the decision, is this the right truck for me? I bought it because it was so cheap, knowing that I could fix it and sell it for a profit if I decided it wasn't the right thing, or I could keep it and have a truck at a good price if it was. Is this the one, or am I gonna decide to sell it and get a different one? We'll just have to wait and see. Thanks for watching. I really appreciate it, and I hope to see you back here next time.